It's now 8 o'clock and we'll call the meeting of the Financial Advisory Commission for January 14th to order. Welcome everybody and glad everybody's doing well. I sent out a draft agenda by email. I'd like to propose one minor revision to the agenda. That is under Roman numeral 6, new business. I have fees and fines discussion. That was really brought up at our last meeting, so I'd like to move that up to unfinished business, just so it has a place on the agenda, although I don't have anything for discussion today, but I just want to keep it on the agenda. So I'd like to move that fees and fines discussion to item 5E. Any objection? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the proposed agenda as just modified.
So move.
Moved by Bob Burton,
Second.
seconded by Jim Cardillo. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. The agenda as revised is approved. You have before you very good minutes that Kim prepared for our December 10th meeting. They were sent out by email for review. Any corrections or revisions or questions? Hearing none, entertain a motion to approve the draft minutes of December 10th.
So move.
Moved by Bob Burton, seconded by Jim Cardillo. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Let's go down to reports. First, Finance Committee. Kim, I'm sorry, Jody, you provided us the other day with some revised revenue projections. Can you go through those for us?
Okay, so
Or there
what
were three sheets you sent us, right?
there were three, yeah, the three documents I sent you.
Yes.
I'll give you a briefing on what these are. I don't know if you recall seeing these earlier in the fall when I did my first round of projections in August, where I'm looking at FY21 revenue and expenditures, and then FY22 revenue and expenditures, which is where we started off our discussions about trying to make ends meet this year. If you remember, the revenue projections for 21 were already $3 million short of what we had anticipated during the budget process in May and June. So we've been working on trying to find ways to save and identify operating savings. And my second round here was done as of November 20th. I ran the numbers, I did some projections, and there's three documents that you have. One is the revenue projections. The second one was the expenditure projections. And then the third one is the fund balance summary that takes my revenue and expenditure projections and rolls forward the projected fund balances that we'll have at the end of 21 and 22 to show you what the differences are. And if you will notice, the highlight here is that as of now, we've found expenditure savings in FY21 to get us through this year. With calling your attention to the fund balance document, if you see this compliance with fund balance policy, kind of summarizes where we're at in 21, where you see that smaller box at the bottom, FY21 fund balance using the FY22 revenue projections. We are projected now to have $326,000 more than our fund balance target at the end of this year. And where that's come from is a couple of things. We're going to be able to reduce the general fund contributions to the health insurance fund because we're having a better realization. We are self-insured, and that we're going to be able to do a premium holiday both for employees and us this year, and to cut back on those premiums. And this is a one-time fix. In fact, all of these are a one-time fix. They're not going to carry into 22. We've also realized in our analysis that our budgeted premiums, healthcare premiums as is, were higher than what we're contributing, because in May, I think it was May, we realized that we had budgeted for a slight flat premiums going into 21. And at the end of the fiscal year, we realized we could reduce the premiums slightly. So we did that, and the budget numbers were never changed to reflect that reduction because it was later in the process. So we're going to have a little bit of a savings there.
How
As you
much?
remember,
Can you
Go
tell
ahead.
us how much, Jody?
how much
Savings.
in total?
Yeah.
It's 28. It's probably about $400,000. I've got it split out by departments here, so it's I'm adding numbers together.
Thank you.
We've also got some CARES money coming in that is going to help us with the public safety salaries, and we've had operational savings in the departments. I noted a couple. We're not paying any school crossing guards out of the police budget. That's one savings we're getting. And we've had some savings in recreation and parks, and just some, we're able to identify some other cost savings in the other departments. And I don't know if that's caused by people not being in the office or that we have reduced activities. So those are the causes. I kind of thought early on, we did those estimates in August, and I didn't assume any operational savings at that time. But we had I anticipated we would identify operational savings at some point during the year, because once you have a few months behind you, you can see what you are actually saving from the operating side.
Jody, let me ask you a question. Are any of these savings that you've been talking about structural? In other words, will they carry over, be able to be carried over into FY22?
No. Mm-mm.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So for the most part, they are one-time fixes where we're finding savings. This premium holiday that we'll have is about half the size of the one we had last year, so it's much smaller. We are anticipating in 22 healthcare costs are going to snap back because people still aren't going to the doctors. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing some of this savings in the healthcare fund. So we don't anticipate that will continue. Right now, we're planning on leaving rates flat. We haven't made that final decision yet for budget, but we may see next year's healthcare cost increase as we get back out and are able to continue with our normal healthcare visits, etc. We the premium, over budgeting the premium, that shouldn't happen this year. That's just something that was the timing of what we did and the decisions that we made going back in May to trim those back. Wouldn't have made any sense. And we have the CARES coverage. Right now we're not anticipating that rolling into next year. We might try to save some of our CARES funding now into next year. As you know, this last round of federal legislation did not give us any extra funding, but it did extend our deadlines for spending what we had. And in December, the county gave us another $550,000 towards public safety salaries. So we're going to try to make that last and carry some of it into next year, to help us through next year, but it's not going to be a lot. If you look at the fund balance tab that I sent you, you'll see that we still have a problem in 22. I think I calculated that off to the right of the spreadsheet, and I think it's 7.4 million that we have to try to fix in the 22 budget. If you look at the detailed revenue estimates I gave you, because that was your first question, how are the revenue projections? Overall, there wasn't much of a change. There were some ups and some increases and some decreases in my projections. And that number is pretty much the same as it was. We'd still be $3 million short.
Bob?
Yeah,
Burton?
Jody, the revenue and expense projections, these don't reflect cash flow, do they?
No,
Okay.
no, and I tell you that cash flow is fine. I check that pretty regularly. We have the same cash balance that we had a year ago. And
Okay.
remember, that's a pooled cash balance. So it's pooling all the cash from all the funds. But from a cash perspective, we're still very healthy. We have a healthy cash balance, and there's not going to be any need to supplement that with borrowing.
You know, in previous discussions that we've had at the FAC, I believe we did request that we have some type of presentation on cash flow during the course of the year, much like you provided us with the revenue projections here. Is that still a possibility, or?
I would, it's a possibility. The way I don't know, it would be tough. It would be time consuming because it involves so many funds, because we have all of our funds cash pooled into one. So you have to look at the trends. And I would probably do that projection based on past history. As long as we continue to keep our expenditures in line with our revenue estimates and find savings, the cash flow should not be impacted.
Okay, but right now, given your report today, you feel fairly confident that our cash flow is in good shape.
It's in really good shape, and I'm very pleased when I see that we have the same pooled cash levels that we had a year ago before the pandemic struck. And going into next year, as you see, we have this issue with the $7.4 million, but our goal is to pass a balanced budget. So we're going to find the revenue sources to cover the expenditures that we anticipate. And we're going to trim the expenditures accordingly.
Thank you.
I think Frank Brown has a yellow hand up. Frank?
Thank you, Fred. Jody, I just wanted to compliment you on what a great job you're doing in trying to find these different ways to help balance the budget. But to further that, has any of the department has been charged with finding ways to be more efficient, or at least reporting to you any trends that they see that might assist you in finding additional savings?
They have all been instructed to find savings where they can. And all of them have a turnover factor in their budget that they have to maintain. And in addition to that, as they fill vacant positions, the city manager has been holding those a few weeks so that we try to produce some extra turnover savings in the budget, and maybe where we're seeing some of our operational savings. And we've had a conversation with the Rec and Parks Department recently regarding trying to trim back the staffing because they don't have any paid programs now. So we're trying to find ways to trim back the staffing costs there, since they're not bringing in any revenues. At the very beginning of this thing, we wanted them to try to keep the staff on and repurpose them to help with some of our COVID response programs. But that's getting more and more difficult to maintain.
Thank you.
Ross, did you have your hand up?
Yes, please. A note of caution on the health savings. We're only a little more than halfway through the year. And I remember, unfortunately, one year where we had just 5 people who got really sick. And so let's pray that that stays at this level, but it could go away. I'm assuming all of our other funds, the enterprise funds, all have the appropriate fund balance levels.
So as far as the utility fund, stormwater, that type of thing, yes, but you see here, I have the parking and the transportation fund here too.
Right.
And those are tied to our general activities. The parking fund, and this is where my attention has been going lately, because the parking fund revenues are down, and we're going to struggle to keep that fund balanced this year. The reduction in the parking, coupled with the rate, the free parking that we've been trying to provide so that businesses could get people downtown during these last few months, that's ended now. So we're going to strive to bring those parking fund revenues up to meet those expenses. But that means that the parking fund cannot subsidize the transportation fund. So we're going to have to try to make that up with that CARES funding grant that they got. They got a big $4 million transportation grant through the CARES Act. The question is now, the state has only released half of that for our use, and we're waiting to find out through discussions with them whether or not they're going to allow us to use some more of that in the second half of this year. So that to me is the greater concern than the general fund, because I think this year the general fund is going to be in good shape.
And Jody, there was transit cares money in the bill that just passed.
Right, they are going to get some more.
That's the one area that there will be additional cares money we anticipate is in transit.
Right, that's very good news. And the only thing is, when will they let us use it? Are they going to let us use more of it this year? That's all up to the Maryland State Department of Transportation, because that's who's funneling that money through to us.
Burden?
Yeah, Jody, just so that I understand the revenue and expense projections that we have before us this morning, and looking at the revenue projections for 2022, FY 2022, total general fund revenues are projected to, it looks like they're projected to be about 81, close to 82 million. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
And then projected expenses for 2022 are going to be about 91 million. Is that correct? Okay, so that's the delta that you're looking to try to resolve here in the budgetary process to come back to a balanced budget.
Right, and when you look at that fund balance roll forward, you see how those numbers, those projections roll forward, and at the end of 22 projected to result in a $7.4 million shortfall. The fund balance would be, if all the projections are accurate, we'd have fund balance short of our projection of our requirements by $7.4 million. But again, that doesn't consider any, as you see these numbers, that doesn't consider savings for next year, which we plan to trim out of the budget, which is probably going to be personal services related trimmings. And we haven't settled on those yet, but we don't know which direction we're going with that. And we haven't finished our discussions with the union groups to get their final input. What you do see an increase in the revenues for 22. We are going to see increased real estate property taxes. Residential values are still climbing. We're expecting a 3% increase on those values, but my expense projections have built in natural inflation on our non-personal services items that pretty much eats up that increase. So we got to try to flatten the personal services costs from 21 into 22. We have to keep them flat. So that's our challenge.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jody on the updated projections? Hearing none, thank you, Jody. I appreciate it. The next item on the agenda, I don't know that there's anything, but just wanted to keep it on the agenda. David, Jody, have there been any further consideration or thought regarding possible, consolidation or sharing of any services with the county?
No, nothing to report.
Okay, thank you. Jim Cardillo, anything on the audit committee?
Thanks. Let's see, the audit committee met the first week of January. We were in the process of adding 2 members, and we are the audit committee enabling legislation is about to go through final approval, I believe. And then the only other item was we began to absorb the recommendations from the external audit that was completed in late 2019. So that's the latest on the audit committee.
Thank you, Jim.
So Jim, the legislation actually passed on Monday night.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I figured I'd find out on Tuesday next week. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions of Jim? Jim, thanks a lot for the report on the audit committee. Go to unfinished business. David, is there any update on the Resiliency Authority legislation?
My understanding is that the county law office is still working on the legislation. They'll go to the county council. So I have not seen a draft or anything from them yet on that. So nothing to report right now.
Okay. David, what's the, I know you've told us before, but just to recall, is it that the county attorney's office will prepare the legislation, it'll go to the county council for action, and then once the county council, acts on it and presumably approves it in some format, then it'll come to the city for city council action?
Correct. Yeah. So as soon as the legislation is prepared, that'll go to the county council. It'll come over to us so we can start sharing that with the city council, and so they'll be familiar with it. But yeah, we want to see what happens with the county before we move forward. If they don't move forward, it'll be a completely different process for us. If they do approve it, then we will piggyback on it, we hope, if the council is willing to support it.
Okay. Any questions of David? No, David, thank you. Spending Affordability Committee Subcommittee, I think, Bob, you're going to be making a presentation to the City Council work session a week from today about the report that you and Meehan prepared and was accepted by this FAC.
Yes, that is correct. That'll be next Thursday at 3:00 in the afternoon, I believe. Correct, David? Yeah.
Yes.
I just have a few questions. Ross, you and members of the city council did receive the report. Has the finance committee reviewed the report? Have any other members of the city council made any comment regarding the report?
Taking the last first, no comments from the rest of the city council. We've talked about this at the last 2 finance committee meetings. I, of course, have read the materials that you gave. I can't speak for my other 2 colleagues on the committee, but I've certainly been urging that they look at that. And I've also been talking about the other thing that is being worked on in the city, the fiscal impact report. And I've been urging that we think about any kind of synergy between those 2 efforts. Some of the data that they're based on are the same, some are different. As you know, Mary Burkholder is doing that for the planning and zoning department. And we did have a presentation featuring that to some extent from Eric Lashinsky before the Planning Commission. So I think people are becoming more and more aware of it. I'm, I, as David can tell you at the finance committee, I'm anxious to get going and make a commitment to really see efforts going to figure out what we can do to bring the spending of feasibility down to the city level with city level data. Um, Having worked in the office of the actuary for many years, I suspect there's going to be a lot of attributions that'll be necessary to bring that down and may make the outcome more notional than we would like it to be. But I think that's something we have to do. I would turn to David. My sense is that the administration is not looking for this to be available for this year's budget exercise. Am I correct in that sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be beneficial, but realistically, I think it probably won't be available.
I guess my rejoinder to that is what level of effort do we think is needed um, to make it available more quickly? Is it a matter of freeing up some funds? Is it a procurement process? I mean, fiscal 22 is pretty dire looking, reviewing Jody's numbers again this morning, and it doesn't look like 22's picture is resolving to look any better than it did when we made the first estimates. And I just know there's going to be a temptation to say we have to increase the tax rate. And I can tell you, I don't think that's going to go down very well with my constituents. So it would be nice to be able to have something that says, look, here's a metric that shows that we are at the top of the scale in terms of taxing our citizens, if in fact we're there. And it could be equally nice to say, hey, we're down in the bottom quadrant in terms of taxing. And it turns out there's a lot more headroom. So quit complaining, so and so. But I don't have a feel for that. I mean, my sense is that we know we're more highly taxed for the same property in the city than in the county by about probably now about $2,000 per annum. But I don't know what the wealth factor is in the city versus the county. I suspect that on average, we have a higher level of income on average and a higher level of wealth. There again, it would be nice to know. I think we have a very bifurcated distribution. I think we have a lot of people at the low end and we have a lot of people way up in the 1%. But I don't know how that shucks out. And that's that feeling of just really not knowing the lay of the land is what makes it uncomfortable when we're trying to make budget decisions and trying to have some guideline for the council saying, well, you might have a little bit of room to increase taxes on people, but most of the pressure's got to come on reducing spending in some way. And we just don't have the metrics to help us with that.
And Ross, that's certainly the approach that we're taking, is that we're looking at the expense side because, I think politics, even more than affordability, are going to drive us to not have a tax increase this year. I just can't see us even proposing, even considering a tax increase this year.
Thank God. I'm music to my ears. I just filled out my papers to file to run again. So I don't want to run on a tax increase.
Jody, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, and to Ross's concern on how we compare with other jurisdictions, we need to do a study of like-sized cities with like issues, with similar issues. We're very unique, and see how we are compared to others, even in other states, on our tax burden. But that's a time-consuming effort because you have to find the right cities to compare to, and then there's nobody that's apples to apples. Nobody. So when you find a candidate, you have to trim out. We have fire and police. They might not do their own fire and police, right. Or they might have a health department, and we don't have the health department. So you have to trim some away here and add some there, and it's hard to find that true comparison And I wish we had the
So,
resources
so
to.
been there, done that, before you were with the city, Bill Karadash and I, and you're absolutely right. It's very hard to find an apples and oranges, and you really do need to pare down and even start just looking at costs for fire department to fire department and police department to police department, and public works to public works. But I can tell you the work we did, one of the striking differences is we have far more employees per capita than these other jurisdictions, and that's what drives us up so high on the cost spectrum. But it is, we never perfected it. It was always unsatisfactory for the very reasons that you said. So like looking at Gaithersburg or Rockville, Rockville has some their police force, but they also use the county police force. And Gaithersburg has a small fire department, but they also rely very heavily on the county, probably mutual aid agreements like we have. So those are tough comparisons, but the notion that we got when we did that work is we have a lot more employees per job, per effort, whatever it is, public works, than these other municipalities, which are bigger than we are. And so there may be some economies of scale that factor into that also, which is something you need to account for, because if you don't account for the economy of scale, it's an unfair comparison. If you're doing fire for 80,000 people versus 40,000 people, and you don't build in a economy of scale factor, it's not a fair comparison. So you're right, it's tough to do.
Very difficult, very time consuming. It would take some time and some expertise to do a really valid analysis of how we are from a tax burden standpoint.
On the other hand, there are companies out there that do it. And it just seems to me we're never going to do it internally and probably don't want to. I just think we need to put that on the agenda. I know we don't want to add more spending to our budget, but sometimes I think you need to spend some to save a lot. And we really need to get that on the radar. And for me, that is the bailiwick of the Financial Advisory Commission, advising the city on those kinds of things that we need to do to budget smarter.
Burton,
Yeah, I think we have two, I don't want to say different discussions going on here, but maybe parallel discussions. Spending affordability is really an exercise where the city itself, through empirical data, will be able to evaluate the ability of the tax base, to afford the core and non-core services that are being considered in any upcoming budget. Whereas I think when you're looking at doing a statistical comparison or analysis of the city with other like cities in the state or around the country or in the region, that generally has not been a function of a spending affordability, effort as, the state and the county exercise it. But nonetheless, still very important, to be able to assess where the city sits in comparison, to similar sized cities with similar needs that they're addressing. But I just want to kind of put it out there that the discussion here, we got two separate discussions going on this, and spending affordability is really focused on, gathering the empirical data to assess the ability of the Annapolis tax base, to be able to afford core and non-core services that are anticipated in any upcoming budget. Which in turn would guide the city council as to whether they can look at potential tax increases or in lieu of that, look at potential expense reductions or foregoing certain initiatives that they would like to do, but the timing relative to the affordability may just not be there.
thank you, Bob. Appreciate those comments. Anything else on this issue? If not, good luck with your presentation next week, Bob.
Thank you.
Okay, the one business item that we have today is the next item on the agenda, and that is the FACTS annual report for 2020. Kim, thank you very much for putting it together as you did last year. I sent it out by email with the meeting materials and asked if anybody had any questions or comments or corrections, etc., to let me know prior to the meeting. I did not hear from anybody, so I'm assuming that the report with this attachment that Kim prepared that I sent out is acceptable. Are there any questions or concerns about the report as distributed? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the FACTS 2020 annual report and authorize it be provided to the city council.
So move.
Motion made by Bob Burden, seconded by Jim Cardillo.
Ed.
Yeah. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by raising your hand or saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
That was belated, Ed Meehan. Was that an aye? That was an aye to approve, correct?
Correct. And I to approve.
Yeah. Okay. Motion carries unanimously. Kim, I'm going to ask you to, if you would, provide it to whoever it needs to be provided to. I believe the city clerk. I electronically signed it, so I'm not going to add a live signature. It's in your hand to distribute. Is that okay, Kim?
That's fine. I'll take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. We had talked previously about possibly coming up with any meeting agenda topics for 2022. I asked people to think about if there's anything, any of you have that you would like to see the FACT work on this year proactively, and that we should be discussing at future meetings, to let me know. I haven't heard anything. I don't have anything in particular. If any of you have any particular agenda topics, let me know, and we can take it from there. The one thing that the city attorney had brought to our attention was perhaps we could provide some guidance on fines and fees and fines. And I think our response to him at the last meeting was that we typically are provided with a fee schedule and fine schedule as part of the budget materials, and do a cursory review, particularly with respect to any changes from the previous year. But my recollection is that we also said that if there are specific fees and fines that the city would like us as a financial advisory commission to look at and evaluate, whether they are sufficient to cover cost or whatever it may be, to let us know, and we'll be happy to undertake that effort in collaboration with staff. So that offer, as far as I'm concerned, is still out there. I don't think it's within our bailiwick to take the entire fee and fine schedule and go from top to bottom and try and make our own independent assessment of the reasonableness or propriety of those fees and fines without a specific request and without background information and guidance from staff. Do any of the FACT members disagree? Okay, I see Ross has his hand up. Ross, go ahead.
There's 2 points on fees and fines, and actually both of them, I think, fall in the Office of Law, not here. A lot of our levels are controlled by state limits. So I think that some of our fines are ridiculously small, just cost of doing business kind of small and not really a deterrent. The fees, however, there's lore, and I think that it is that lore, that fees can only be the cost to administer plus some margin. And I've run across some things that say that might not necessarily be the case. This particularly came up when we were talking about short-term rental licenses. And it is very clear that we're charging a very different fee than the county, particularly right now. The county's down to $50 for 2 years, and we're charging $200 per year. There can't be that much of a difference in the cost to administer between the two, although I wouldn't deny it. But I think that those are some things that I'm going to carry forward to the Rules and City Government Committee to ask the Office of Law about. They will have a financial implication, and certainly I would think the FAC would want to be aware of those discussions. I don't know how big of an impact they would make in terms of raising the level of revenue by any significant amount, although it could potentially, particularly if it was an across the board kind of an adjustment. But it is ironic to me that law asked you when I really think the ball is in their court.
Bob Burton?
Yes, I have two questions. One referring to, possible 2021 meeting agenda topics. Another may be a little bit of a digression, but the first question with the agenda topics. David, are the union negotiations on the table for this coming fiscal year?
So we have an agreement that continues through the next fiscal year, but we're reopening negotiations because of the dire financial situation that we're facing next year to try and address the COLAs and the step increases and, some of the other personnel related costs.
Will the city be seeking any input from the FAC on those issues that might be discussed in the reopening?
We're certainly interested in your input. I think we understand from past discussions that you are very concerned about the growth of personnel costs in the city, and that any attempt to try to drive those down is probably supported by the FAC. So I think that tells us as much as we probably need to know going into those discussions that you are very concerned about personnel costs.
Okay. Fred, the second question I have may digress a little bit into maybe a past agenda item or not, but prior to coming into our live session, there was a brief mention about, pending security issues in Annapolis, given that we are the capital city of Maryland. And, some of the concerns that are out there that have been conveyed by federal law enforcement to all state capitals around the country. Does the city of Annapolis have certain obligations from a police standpoint, expense-wise and otherwise, and being able to shore up our security in this capital city, or is that something that the state is taking on completely to be able to provide those necessary security measures and the associated costs that go with it?
Bob, all law enforcement agencies are gearing up for this. We're taking this very seriously. We've had a lot of discussions with both the state, the various state law enforcement agencies, as well as the Naval Academy, the federal ones, to put together a plan to respond to that. There's going to be a lot of boots on the ground this weekend and for next week before the inauguration. So this is being taken very seriously. We will, I guess, be responsible for our costs because there's going to be a pretty significant overtime cost associated with our police department because of all the people that need to be in the downtown area. But the state is bringing in a lot of people as well to support this effort. So it's going to be a big effort.
Okay. Okay. Jody.
Thank you. Let me just ask a question on that topic, David. You said it's going to require a lot of overtime. You all have been doing a really good job trying to project cost and revenues and expenses. Now, is this going to be an unanticipated additional substantial expense that's going to have some sort of greater impact on the overall budget for this year? To either you,
There's
David,
a
or
certain
Jody?
amount of overtime that's already in the budget. Will it exceed that? Perhaps. We certainly had a lot of police overtime this past summer when we had all the shootings as well, when we staffed up to have people in all of the various areas of concern. So it perhaps could, and it could perhaps eat into some of the savings that Jody was talking about, but this is something that we need to do. So
Yeah, it's something you absolutely have to do.
Yeah.
Just wondering what impact it will have on the budget. So, okay, I see Jim Cardillo has a yellow hand up.
No, this was in response to your earlier request about topics for this next year.
Yeah.
I just believe that the two issues that are ongoing, the spending affordability and the state resiliency authority, are just top of mind items that we should keep in mind for 2021.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Fred, Jody has her hand up.
I'm sorry, I missed it. How can,
Yeah.
it got, anyway, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to add to the fact that the overtime that we have this weekend, I don't know how many people it will be. I'm not a part of the discussions on the logistics, but we are tracking it. We set up a payroll code and a munis code where we accumulate those costs. So we'll be able to know what they are. And if it turns out there's any state money coming back to help us, we'll be able to know what those costs are. I mean, sometimes when there's a state of emergency declared, the Maryland Emergency Management will have grants that come down and help us fund some of those expenses. So we track those just in case there's some funding available to us. So we will be able to quantify that. If it's just the weekend, it might not be that big of a deal. If it's something that stretches out longer, it could be significant.
Thanks a lot, Jody. Appreciate it. That concludes the items I have on the agenda. The next meeting will be February 11th at 8 a.m. by video conference, unless you hear otherwise, which I can't imagine you'll hear otherwise. Anybody have anything else for the good of the order you'd like to discuss today? Hearing nothing, thank you all very, very much for your participation. I would say, as I always do, stay healthy, stay safe, stay well, and we'll catch you next month. And I would just ask you, if anything comes up during the month from any of the FACT members that you want us to talk about or have me put on the agenda, please let me know, probably a week in advance, because I tend to do the agendas the weekend before our meetings, so that I'll be aware of that and can accommodate your request. Okay. All right. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Bob Burden made it. Jim Cardillo seconded it. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? No. Everybody be well. Have a great day and